Throughout the history of the United States, slavery has plagued our past, primarily because many people still haven't found a healthy way to come to terms with the mistreatment of human beings that occurred during this period. Much of the sentiment that caused the Civil War in America was driven by the abolitionist movement. But contrary to what many people believe, though, that movement had been around 4 years before the war even began, and some fascinating, complex stories unfolded because of it. One such story began in 1822.
A wise guy, eh?
Salutations, fellow nerds. I'm Rick Y, and today is July 10th, 2025, although I imagine most of you won't see this until the 11th. There's an opportunity here for some of you to understand just how deep the humiliation runs when Trump is the face of this country. The only way I can convey that is by sharing some context, some history, and then inviting you to embrace the suck like the rest of us. The goal? I guess be a little smarter, a little more aware, and a lot more prepared for the ape's latest round of ramblings. And if we have to, so do you. So sit down. The American Colonization Society, totally gross name by the way, was founded in 1816 with the express intent of repatriating free African Americans back to the African continent. Some of y'all may recognize this premise as what we now call deportation. The twist here is, instead of returning freed people to the nations their ancestors had come from, they were given a new country to govern. But before we start praising this as some noble move, let's be real, it wasn't altruism. It was a public relations and power move for rich white elites. I know, our ancestors were something else, huh? Instead of real empowerment or integration at home, colonization became a pressure valve. Relieve white guilt, preserve white dominance. In 1822, the ACS secured land on the West African coast through a series of negotiations, some peaceful, others with local leaders like the Dey and Bassa peoples. The first settlers, freed black Americans, brought with them American customs. Clothing, Christianity, English, architecture, even a constitution modeled after the U.S. What they also brought was deeply ingrained social hierarchies that were shaped by their past in a society built on ownership and oppression. They established Monrovia, named after U.S. President James Monroe, and it became the capital. Over the next few decades, thousands more fled to the racism and second-class status that they face in the U.S. But this was no easy transition. For many, the journey was complicated. Some went willingly, hoping for a better life, a chance to escape America's caste system. Others were desperate, misled, or even coerced. But even those who arrived with hope were often unprepared, facing disease, unfamiliar terrain, and resistance from local population. It turns out when you plant your flag in land that's already inhabited, folks get touchy. Who knew? Once settled, the new arrivals clung to the structures that they knew. American hierarchies, Christianity, and a belief, conscious or not, that they were superior to the uncivilized locals. The trauma they had internalized in America was now being replicated as rule over others. Rather than integrate with the indigenous populations, Americo-Liberians formed an elite ruling class. They saw themselves as civilizers, echoing the same colonial attitude that had once dehumanized them. And by the mid-1800s, they controlled Liberia's government, economy, and courts. Indigenous people were barred from voting and pressured to adopt Western customs to even be considered citizens. In 1847, Liberia declared its independence, becoming the first modern African republic. It still is the oldest today. But independence was mostly on paper. Economically, Liberia remained dependent on the United States, and internally its structures mirrored America's racial caste system. One party held power for over 130 years, the true Whig Party. Imagine if MAGA won the presidency and just never gave it back until the year 2155. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Liberia struggled to expand inland, and often did so by fighting the very indigenous groups it was built on top of. History may not repeat itself, but when it rhymes, it sounds like colonization. It's not about the land you settle, but all the new friends you oppress along the way. Despite the so-called independence, Liberia became a resource sink for Western corporations. In the 1920s, Firestone opened massive rubber plantations, exploiting cheap labor and entrenching economic disparity. Americo-Liberians widened the economic gap, while indigenous Liberians were taxed, conscripted, and marginalized. Their languages and customs were dismissed and devalued. That is, until 1980. On April 20th, 1980, just before dawn, a 28-year-old master sergeant named Samuel Doe, a member of the Kron ethnic group, led 17 low-ranking soldiers in a surprise assault on the executive mansion of Monrovia, where President William Tolbert, an Americo-Liberian, was sleeping. They found Tolbert in bed and stabbed and shot him, some say, over 20 times. 13 high-ranking officials, mostly Americo-Liberians, were rounded up, tried in mock courts, and executed by firing squad on a beach in Monrovia. The executions were filmed and aired on national television. Doe then declared himself head of state, suspended the Constitution, banned political parties, and ruled through a military junta called the People's Redemption Council. Brutal? Yes. But for many indigenous Liberians, it felt like justice. A long overdue toppling of a regime that had ruled without them for 133 years. Unfortunately, Doe's rule soon became violent, corrupt, and ethnically divisive. Now, this is where we pause, because for many Americans, ethnicity is flattened into race, but in West Africa, identity is far more complex. In the U.S., you might be black, white, Latino, or Asian. In Liberia, you're Kron, Geo, Mano, Kabele, Bassa, Grebo, and more. They're all seen as black by American racial standards, but ethnicity in Liberia defines who you marry, who you trust, and who holds power. Think of it like the Irish or Italian Americans back in the early 1900s. They're culturally distinct, they're politically active, and fiercely self-identified. Or better yet, imagine the U.S. still organized around tribal nations, Cherokee, Navajo, Iroquois, each with their own languages and leaders, all labeled Native American by outsiders. When Samuel Doe took power, he favored his own ethnic group, the Kron, which sparked deep resentment from groups like the Geo and the Mano in the north. This ethnic favoritism helped ignite civil war. In December 1989, Charles Taylor, a former government official accused of embezzlement, returned from exile with a rebel force, the NPFL, National Patriotic Front of Liberia, not to be confused with the National Penguin Football League, and yes, it's soccer, not our Yankee pigskin malarkey. Taylor entered Liberia from the Ivory Coast with just about 100 fighters, but quickly gained support from ethnic groups who had suffered under Doe. As they advanced, the country fractured along ethnic lines. Warlord factions propped up, and by September 1990, Doe was captured and tortured to death by a breakaway rebel group, the INPFL, led by Prince Johnson. The execution was filmed in a now infamous video, and peace did not follow. More warlords rose, civilians suffered, child soldiers, massacres, ethnic cleansing. It was a nightmare. The war killed 200,000 people and displaced over 1 million. In 1997, Charles Taylor ran for president and won under the slogan, "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will vote for him," because people thought supporting him would bring peace. Spoiler, it did not. Taylor's presidency brought corruption, repression, and more war. He backed rebels in Sierra Leone, helping plunge that country into civil war too. In response, new rebel groups, LURD and Model, rose up. By the early 2000s, Taylor only controlled a third of Liberia. With the U.S. and UN and regional powers pressing, Taylor resigned in August 2003, fleeing to Nigeria and later facing trial at The Hague, where he was convicted of war crimes in Sierra Leone. In 2005, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf became Liberia's first democratically elected president and Africa's first female head of state. Liberia began a slow recovery, but the scars remain. Broken infrastructure, missing generations, and deep psychological trauma, which brings us to 2025. At a White House summit on July 9th, where President Trump tried to compliment Liberian President Joseph Boakai by saying,
"Well, thank you. It's such good English, such beautiful. Where did you learn to speak so beautifully? Where were you educated? Where? In Liberia.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's very interesting. It's beautiful English.
Sure.
I have people at this table can't speak nearly as well,
Very
and
good, sir. Thank you.
they come from here. So thank you very much. Please.
This man has had me cringing vicariously for almost 10 years. Remember when MAGA claimed the world was laughing at Biden? This is what they thought it looked like. But here's the thing. English has been Liberia's official language since 1847. Their schools, government, courts. It's all English. Why? Because they were literally founded by freed American slaves. And now the same man who once referred to African nations as poophole countries is shocked a Liberian president can speak English good. Also worth noting, USAID funding once accounted for 2.6% of Liberia's national GDP. That same administration is now cutting aid, slapping tariffs, and patting the country on the head like it's a little toddler who's just learning how to speak. Dear MAGA, I want to believe that you're smart enough to understand why this is so humiliating. This is the same man who told you that Epstein's client list was just a figment of your imagination, and that it was also destroyed by Joe Biden. So if you had blaming Biden for Epstein's cover-up on your Trump crisis bingo card, go ahead and mark it. This is why knowledge and wisdom matter. We've turned leadership into a popularity contest, and it's doing us zero favors. Anyway, if you appreciated this content, consider liking, subscribing, or sharing it with someone who's never heard the story before. Thanks for sticking it out. I hope I helped at least one person learn something new. And y'all come back now. You hear?